The rain hammered against my kitchen window like bullets on tin, and I sat there at 3 in the morning, nursing my 4th cup of coffee and wondering when my life had become a bad country song. My name is Jason Fairburn, and if you're looking for a hero in this story, you've come to the wrong place. I'm just a guy who builds things for a living and tears them down when necessary. Laura's headlights swept across the driveway like searchlights hunting for escaped prisoners. She was 4 hours late, again. I watched through the blinds as she sat in her BMW for a full minute, probably checking her makeup or rehearsing whatever lies she'd crafted for tonight's performance. "Welcome home, sweetheart," I called out as she stumbled through the door, her designer dress wrinkled and her lipstick long gone. "I kept your dinner warm." It's only been sitting there since 8. She kicked off her heels and shot me that look, the one that used to make me want to kiss her and now made me want to check my life insurance policy. "Don't start with me, Jason." It was a work thing. "Must have been some meeting," I said, leaning against the kitchen counter. "HR directors sure work late these days." Laura's phone buzzed on the counter between us. The screen lit up with a text that made my blood turn to ice water. "Can't wait to see you again tomorrow night." "You're incredible. Scotty." The silence stretched between us like a tightrope over hell. Laura lunged for the phone, but I was faster. Construction work keeps your reflexes sharp. "Scotty?" I asked, my voice steady as concrete. "That wouldn't be Scott Williams, would it?" "The same Scott Williams, whose name I saw on some interesting paperwork regarding our mortgage?" Laura's face went white, then red, then white again. "Jason, it's not what you think." "Really?" "Because what I think is that my wife has been sleeping with the real estate vulture who somehow got his name on the deed to my house." I set her phone down gently, like it was made of dynamite. "So please, enlighten me. What exactly should I be thinking?" She straightened her shoulders and lifted her chin, transforming from caught cheater to ice queen in seconds. It was a trick she'd perfected over our 12 years of marriage. "Fine," she said. "Yes, Scott and I are together. Yes, he owns this house now. And yes, you have exactly 48 hours to pack your things and get out." I laughed. Actually laughed. The sound echoed through our kitchen like a gunshot. 48 hours? That's generous. Most people give 2 weeks' notice when they're ending someone's life. "Don't be dramatic, Jason. You'll figure something out." "You always do." She turned to leave, probably heading upstairs to shower off whatever cologne Scott wore. But I wasn't done. "Laura," I called after her, "just one more thing." She paused on the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. "I hope you and Scott enjoy your new foundation." "I really do." Something in my tone made her turn around. For just a moment, I saw a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. Good. She should be uncertain. After she disappeared upstairs, I sat back down at the kitchen table and pulled out my phone. Time to make some calls. See, there's something Laura and her boyfriend Scott don't know about foundations, both the concrete kind and the legal kind. I've been in construction for 15 years. I know how to read blueprints, property surveys, and most importantly, I know how to read the fine print on deeds and land leases. Scott Williams might own the house now, but the land underneath it? That's a different story entirely. I scrolled through my contacts until I found Attorney Green's number. Yeah, I was going to wake him up at 3 in the morning, but this couldn't wait. Some foundations need to be poured in the dark. As I waited for him to answer, I looked around the kitchen Laura wanted to kick me out of. The cabinets I'd installed by hand. The tile work I'd spent 3 weekends perfecting. The breakfast nook where my daughters Beth and Janie ate their cereal every morning before school. Laura thought she was so smart, trading up from a construction worker to a real estate hotshot. But she'd forgotten one crucial detail. I'm the guy who taught her everything she knows about reading contracts. The phone rang twice before Green's groggy voice answered. "Jason? Do you have any idea what time it is?" "Time to build something new," I said, "and time to tear something else down." The next morning found me in my construction yard at dawn, surrounded by the comforting smell of sawdust and diesel fuel. My workshop had become my temporary home, complete with a cot in the back office and a coffee maker that could wake the dead. Manny Gutierrez, my right-hand man and the closest thing I had to a brother, showed up with donuts and a sympathetic grin. "So," he said, settling his stocky frame onto a saw bench, "your wife really threw you out for some real estate, pretty boy?" "She tried to," I said, firing up my laptop. "But she made one crucial mistake. She assumed I was as stupid as I look." Manny snorted. "Boss, you look like a guy who could calculate square footage in his sleep and spot a crooked contractor from 3 counties away. If that's stupid, I'm Albert Einstein." I pulled up the property records I'd been studying since my 3 a.m. phone call with Green. "Take a look at this, Einstein. What do you see?" Manny squinted at the screen. He could frame a house in his sleep, but legal documents made his eyes cross. "I see a bunch of lawyer words that give me a headache." "Those lawyer words are beautiful, Manny. Beautiful and very, very expensive for Scott Williams." I pointed to a specific clause buried in paragraph 17. "See, when Laura had me sign that quitclaim deed last month, the one she said was just to simplify our finances, I thought I was signing over the house." "But you weren't?" "Oh, I signed over the house, all right. The structure, the building, but not the land lease underneath it." I leaned back in my chair, feeling the first genuine smile I'd had in weeks spread across my face. Scott Williams owns a house that's sitting on land I control, and according to this lease agreement, I can revoke his access to utilities, drainage, and even the driveway. Manny's eyes widened. "You mean—" "I mean our boy Scott just bought himself the world's most expensive paperweight." My phone buzzed with a text from Diana Mays, a woman I'd met in the cycling club I'd joined after Laura started working late every night. Diana was everything Laura wasn't. Straightforward, genuine, and she laughed at my jokes instead of rolling her eyes. "Coffee later? You sounded stressed yesterday." "Diana," I texted back, "can't. Busy demolishing my wife's new relationship." "Rain check?" Her response came immediately. "Now I'm intrigued. Call me if you need backup." That's what I liked about Diana. She didn't ask a million questions or try to talk me out of whatever I was planning. She just offered to help. Around noon, I drove past my old house, Laura's house now, I guess, and saw Scott's silver Mercedes parked in my driveway. The sight of it sitting there, gleaming and arrogant, made my hands clench on the steering wheel. I parked down the street and walked back, fishing a piece of construction chalk from my pocket. On Scott's windshield, I wrote in large, neat letters, "Enjoy the ride. Not illegal, not even permanent, but satisfying as hell." That evening, I found myself at Murphy's Tavern, the kind of dive bar where construction workers and real people went to drink beer and complain about their lives. I was on my second beer when Vicky Chen, Laura's best friend and social media coordinator, slid into the booth across from me. "Jason," she said, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, "I heard about you and Laura. I'm so sorry." Vicky was the type of woman who collected drama like some people collected stamps. She'd been Laura's maid of honor at our wedding, and I'd never trusted her smile. "Thanks, Vicky. I'm sure you're real broken up about it." She leaned forward, lowering her voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "Between you and me, I think Laura's making a mistake. Scott's nice and all, but he's got some serious financial problems." "Financial problems?" "Oh yeah. His real estate company is leveraged to the hilt. That's why he's been buying up properties so fast. He needs the quick turnaround to stay afloat." She sipped her Cosmopolitan and studied my face. "Of course, now that he's got your house, he's planning to tear it down and build one of those McMansions. Flip it for a huge profit." I kept my expression neutral, but inside, I was grinning like a wolf. Scott was counting on that house to save his business. This just kept getting better. "That's interesting, Vicky. Thanks for the heads up." She patted my hand. "I just thought you should know. Laura's my friend, but what she did to you wasn't right." After Vicky left, I called Manny. "Meet me at the yard. We've got work to do." "What kind of work?" the kind that involves spark plugs and shrimp. An hour later, we were back at Scott's Mercedes. While Manny kept watch, I popped the hood and carefully removed 3 of the 4 spark plugs. The car would start, but it would run like a dying rhinoceros. Then, for the finishing touch, I stuffed a handful of cocktail shrimp from Murphy's kitchen into the air conditioning vents. "Boss," Manny whispered, "remind me never to get on your bad side." "This isn't my bad side, Manny. This is just me being neighborly." We were back at the yard, sharing a beer and planning our next move, when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. "Mr. Fairburn? This is Scott Williams. I think we need to talk." "Do we? About what?" "About the fact that my car smells like a seafood restaurant and won't run properly. About the message on my windshield. About the way you're harassing me and Laura." I leaned back in my chair and put my feet up on my desk. "Scott, I have no idea what you're talking about, but if your car is having problems, I'd recommend a good mechanic. And maybe some air freshener. Listen to me very carefully, you pathetic loser. Laura is mine now. The house is mine. If you come anywhere near us again, I'll have you arrested for stalking." "That's a serious accusation, Scott. I hope you've got some evidence to back it up." The line went quiet for a moment. Then Scott's voice came back, lower and more dangerous. "I don't need evidence. I need you gone. 48 hours, remember?" "Oh, I remember. But Scott, there's something you should remember too." "What's that?" "I'm the guy who knows where all the bodies are buried. Metaphorically speaking, of course." I hung up and looked at Manny, who was staring at me with something between admiration and concern. "Boss, what exactly are you planning?" "I'm planning to give Scott Williams a crash course in the construction business. Starting with lesson 1, always check your foundation before you build." The next morning, I woke up to find an official eviction notice taped to the door of my workshop. Scott had moved fast. I'd give him that. But he'd also made his first major mistake. He'd served me the papers personally, which meant I could file a harassment complaint if I wanted to. Instead, I drove to the city planning office and pulled the complete property records for my old address. What I found there made me laugh so hard that Mrs. Patterson, the clerk, asked if I was having some kind of breakdown. "Just the opposite," I told her. "I'm having a breakthrough." See, Scott's ownership of the house was legitimate. Laura had managed that much correctly. But the land lease was a separate document, one that had been filed with the county 20 years ago when the subdivision was first developed. The lease gave the homeowner the right to occupy the land, but it also included a clause that let the leaseholder terminate the agreement with 30 days' notice. Guess who was still listed as the leaseholder? I drove straight to the utility companies. First the electric company, then water, then gas. At each stop, I presented my documentation and made the same request. Disconnect service to the property, effective immediately. The leaseholder, me, was exercising his right to terminate utility access. By noon, Scott's dream house was sitting powerless and dry on land he couldn't legally occupy. My phone started ringing around 1 o'clock. "What the hell did you do?" Laura's voice was shrill enough to shatter glass. "I exercised my legal rights as leaseholder. Didn't Scott read the fine print before he bought the house?" "You can't do this." "We have rights." "You have the right to own a house, Laura. You don't have the right to put it on my land without my permission." I hung up and immediately called Attorney Green. "How fast can you file a 30-day eviction notice for unauthorized use of leased property? How fast can you pay my retainer? How about I build you that deck your wife's been wanting? Free labor, you just buy materials? I'll have the papers ready by 5. Around 3, I decided to take a drive past the house. Laura's BMW was in the driveway next to Scott's Mercedes, and I could see them through the front window, gesturing wildly at each other. The argument looked heated, and I found myself wishing I could hear it. That's when I spotted Mrs. Larrabee, my elderly neighbor, watering her garden with the dedication of a woman who had nothing better to do than monitor the neighborhood drama. I parked and walked over to her fence. "Afternoon, Mrs. Larrabee. How's the garden coming?" "Oh, Jason!" She practically ran to the fence, her eyes bright with gossip. "I'm so glad to see you. There's been such commotion next door. That new man has been yelling and carrying on something awful." "Really? About what?" "Well, I couldn't help but overhear. You know how thin these walls are. And he was on the phone with someone, screaming about utilities and contracts and threatening to sue everybody from here to Houston." She leaned closer. "And between you and me, I don't think your Laura is very happy with her new arrangement." "Why's that?" "Because she came over here this morning, crying and asking if I knew how to reach you. Said she needed to talk to you about fixing this mess. Those were her exact words." I thanked Mrs. Larrabee and was walking back to my truck when Scott's front door flew open. He stormed out, still in his expensive suit, but looking significantly less polished than usual. "Fairburn," he shouted, "get over here." I stopped and turned around slowly. "Something I can help you with, Scott?" He marched across the yard, his face red with anger. "You know exactly what you can help me with. Turn the utilities back on." "I'm afraid I can't do that. The lease agreement is very clear about authorized usage." "This is harassment! I'll have you arrested." "For what?" "Following the law." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Please, Scott, tell me more about how following legal procedures is harassment." That's when he made his second major mistake. He grabbed my phone. "Hey!" I shouted, loud enough for Mrs. Larrabee and anyone else in the neighborhood to hear. "Give me back my phone." Scott looked at the device in his hand like he couldn't believe he'd grabbed it. You were recording me without permission." "Actually, in Texas, I only need one party's consent to record a conversation. That party being me." I held out my hand. "My phone, please." Instead of giving it back, Scott threw it, hard. It landed in the street and shattered against the asphalt. "Oops," he said with a smirk. "That's destruction of property," I said calmly. "Mrs. Larrabee, did you see what just happened?" My elderly neighbor was practically hanging over her fence. "I certainly did. He threw your phone right into the street." Scott's smirk faded. "It was an accident." "Funny kind of accident," I said. "But don't worry about it, Scott. I've got insurance and witnesses." I walked over and picked up the pieces of my phone, making sure to document the damage thoroughly with Mrs. Larrabee's help. Then I got in my truck and drove away, leaving Scott standing in his powerless driveway. But I didn't go far. I parked around the corner and called Diana from a payphone outside a gas station. "Jason? You sound different." "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Everything's going exactly according to plan. But I might need that backup you offered." "What kind of backup?" "The kind where you help me stay out of jail while I finish what I started." Diana was quiet for a moment. "This is about your wife, isn't it?" "This is about justice. Sometimes they're the same thing." "Where do you want to meet?" I looked back toward my old neighborhood, where Scott Williams was probably trying to figure out how to take a shower without running water. "Murphy's Tavern, 1 hour, and Diana, bring your camera. Tonight's going to be memorable." The 4th of July block party had been a neighborhood tradition for 8 years, ever since the Hendersons moved in and decided our street needed more community spirit. I'd helped organize it every year, setting up tables, stringing lights, and manning the grill. This year, I wasn't officially invited. That didn't stop me from showing up. Diana met me at the corner, carrying a small digital camera and wearing a sundress that made me remember what it felt like to appreciate a woman who appreciated me back. "You sure about this?" she asked, studying the crowd of neighbors gathered in the street. "I'm sure about a lot of things. Like the fact that Scott's planning to announce his engagement to my wife at a party in my old neighborhood, using my barbecue grill, in front of people I've known for 12 years. How do you know about the engagement?" I pointed to Vicky, who was setting up what looked suspiciously like a champagne station near the dessert table. "Vicky's been posting about it on social media all week. Big announcement coming at the block party with about 50 heart emojis. Diana raised her camera and took a few test shots. And you're planning to do what, exactly? I'm planning to give them an announcement they'll never forget. We walked into the party like we belonged there, which, technically, I did. These were my neighbors, my friends, people whose porches I'd repaired and whose kids I'd taught to throw a baseball. The fact that my wife had kicked me out didn't change 8 years of history. Jason, Mrs. Larrabee appeared at my elbow like a tiny, gray-haired ninja. I'm so glad you came. Everyone's been asking about you. Have they? Oh, yes, especially after what happened with the utilities. The whole street knows about it now. She lowered her voice to a whisper. And between you and me, most folks aren't too happy with your wife's new boyfriend. I looked around and noticed she was right. People were greeting me warmly, but when Scott appeared with Laura on his arm, the conversations got quieter and the smiles got thinner. Scott had cleaned up nicely, fresh haircut, expensive polo shirt, and a smile that probably cost him a fortune in dental work. Laura looked beautiful as always, but there was something brittle about her expression, like she was holding herself together with willpower and hairspray. They made their way through the crowd, Scott shaking hands and Laura accepting air kisses from the neighborhood wives. I watched from beside the Hendersons' azaleas, waiting for the right moment. It came when Scott tapped a beer bottle with a fork and called for everyone's attention. Friends, he said, his voice carrying that practiced smoothness of a man who sold million-dollar properties for a living. Laura and I wanted to share some wonderful news with all of you. The crowd gathered closer. I stayed where I was, but Diana moved to get a better angle with her camera. As you all know, Laura and I have been together for several months now, and we've fallen deeply in love. Scott put his arm around Laura's waist and pulled her close. So it gives me great pleasure to announce that she's agreed to be my wife. The crowd made appropriate congratulatory noises, but I noticed they were more polite than enthusiastic. These people had been to my wedding. They'd watched Laura and me build a life together in this neighborhood. This felt like a betrayal to them, too. Scott wasn't finished. We're planning a Christmas wedding, and of course, you're all invited. We'll be sending invitations from our beautiful new home right here on Maple Street. That's when I stepped forward. Congratulations, Scott, I said loudly enough for everyone to hear. I hope you're planning to register for camping gear. The crowd turned to look at me, and I saw expressions ranging from surprise to delight to barely concealed glee. Mrs. Larrabee actually clapped her hands. Scott's smile faltered. Jason, I didn't expect to see you here. Really? This is my neighborhood, Scott. These are my friends. Where else would I be on the 4th of July? Laura's face had gone pale. Jason, please don't make a scene. A scene? I'm just offering my congratulations to the happy couple. I walked closer, and the crowd parted to let me through. Although, I have to ask, Scott, did you tell Laura about the little problem with your new house? There's no problem with the house. No. Then why haven't you moved in yet? It's been 3 days since you kicked me out. Scott's jaw tightened. There are some minor utility issues we're resolving. Minor utility issues, I repeated, looking around at the crowd. Is that what we're calling it when someone buys a house without reading the land lease agreement? I read every document. Did you read paragraph 17 of the county land lease? The part about leaseholder rights and utility access? I pulled a folded paper from my pocket. Because I've got a copy right here if you'd like to review it. The crowd was dead silent now, everyone straining to hear. This was better than cable television. Scott's face was turning red. You can't do this. You can't just cut off utilities out of spite. Spite? I laughed. Scott, this isn't spite. This is business. You bought a house on land you can't legally occupy from a woman who didn't have the right to sell it. That's not spite. That's stupidity. You son of a... Scott started toward me, but Laura grabbed his arm. Scott, don't. But Scott was past listening to reason. He shook off Laura's hand and got right in my face. "You pathetic loser. You think you can intimidate me? You think you can ruin this for us?" I stood my ground, very aware that Diana was recording everything and that 30 of my neighbors were watching. "I don't think anything, Scott. I know. I know that you're leveraged up to your eyeballs with that real estate company. I know you were counting on flipping my house to stay solvent. And I know that without utilities or legal access to the land, that house is worth exactly nothing." That's when Scott shoved me. It wasn't a hard shove, but it was enough to make me take a step backward. It was also enough to constitute assault in front of 30 witnesses. "Bad move," I said quietly. Then I shoved him back. Scott stumbled backward, tripped over the Hendersons' garden hose, and landed flat on his back in the kiddie pool they'd set up for the younger kids. The splash was magnificent, soaking his expensive clothes and washing the gel out of his perfect hair. The crowd erupted in laughter and applause. Mrs. Larrabee was cheering like her team had just won the World Series. Scott floundered in 18 inches of water, sputtering and cursing. When he tried to get up, his feet slipped on the plastic bottom and he went down again. "Need a hand?" I offered, extending my arm. He slapped it away and finally managed to climb out of the pool, water streaming from his clothes. "You're going to pay for this, Fairburn." "I'm calling the police." "Please do," I said. "I'm sure they'd love to hear about how you assaulted me in front of all these witnesses." Laura was staring at Scott like she'd never seen him before. Her fiancé, the successful businessman, was standing in her neighbor's yard, dripping wet and throwing a tantrum like a 5-year-old. "Scott," she said quietly, "maybe we should go. We're not going anywhere. This is our neighborhood now." "Actually," said Bob Henderson, the party host, "I think maybe you should leave. This is supposed to be a family event." Scott looked around the crowd and seemed to realize for the first time that no one was on his side. These people had known me for 8 years. They'd known him for 8 weeks, and most of what they'd learned they didn't like. "Fine," he said, "but this isn't over, Fairburn." "You're right," I agreed. "It's not." As Scott stalked away, dripping and humiliated, Laura lingered for a moment. She looked like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. "Nice party," I told her. "Thanks for the invitation." Then I turned to Diana, who was grinning behind her camera. "Did you get all that?" "Every second of it. That was better than a movie." As we walked away from the party, I could hear the conversation starting up again behind us, everyone talking at once about what they'd just witnessed. By tomorrow, the whole story would be all over social media, and Scott Williams would be the laughingstock of the neighborhood. But I wasn't done with him yet, not even close. The next morning brought a phone call that made my coffee taste like victory. Attorney Green's voice was practically singing with professional satisfaction. "Jason, you're going to love this. Scott Williams filed a complaint against you for assault, harassment, and destruction of property. That doesn't sound like something I should love. It is when his complaint contradicts 3 different statements he made to police over the past week, and when I have video evidence of him assaulting you first." Green chuckled. "Plus, Mrs. Larrabee called the police station this morning to volunteer as a witness. Apparently, she's prepared to testify that Scott has been terrorizing the neighborhood with his aggressive behavior." God bless Mrs. Larrabee, it gets better. I also received a very interesting phone call from Scott's mortgage company. Seems they're having second thoughts about a loan secured by a property with no legal utilities access. I leaned back in my desk chair and put my feet up. How big of second thoughts? The kind that involves words like foreclosure and immediate payment in full. And Scott can't make the payment? Not according to my source at First National. His real estate company has been hemorrhaging money for months. He was counting on a quick flip of your house to keep his business afloat. After I hung up with Green, I called Manny and told him to meet me at the house with a crew and some heavy equipment. It was time for the next phase of my plan. We arrived at Maple Street around noon, just as Scott was pulling into the driveway. He saw my work truck and the small crew I'd brought, and his face went from confused to furious in about 2 seconds. "What the hell are you doing here?" he demanded, climbing out of his car. I consulted the clipboard in my hands. According to the land lease agreement, I'm conducting a property inspection. As leaseholder, I have the right to ensure that any structures on the property meet county building codes. This is harassment. This is business, Scott. Manny, let's start with the foundation inspection. Manny grinned and fired up a small jackhammer. The sound was beautiful, like mechanical thunder rolling across the neighborhood. "You can't do this!" Scott was practically screaming now. "Actually, I can. County code requires that any structure on leased land undergo annual safety inspections. This house hasn't been inspected in..." I checked my fake paperwork. 12 years. Way overdue. What we were actually doing was completely legal, if somewhat creative. The land lease did give me inspection rights, and county code did require safety inspections on older structures. The fact that I was exercising those rights now when it would cause Scott maximum inconvenience was just good timing. Manny started drilling test holes in the driveway, ostensibly to check the foundation stability. Each hole was small, but there were going to be a lot of them. "This is my property," Scott shouted. "The structure is your property," I corrected. "The land belongs to the leaseholder." Me. And I have serious concerns about the structural integrity of this driveway. Laura's BMW pulled up just as Manny moved on to testing the front walkway. She got out slowly, staring at the growing collection of small holes in what used to be her pristine driveway. "Jason," she said quietly, "what are you doing?" "I'm protecting my investment, Laura. If this house collapses due to structural problems, it could damage my land. I have to make sure everything is up to code." "The house isn't going to collapse." "How do you know? When's the last time you had the foundation inspected? The electrical system? The plumbing?" I made a note on my clipboard. "We'll need to do a complete inspection. Should take about a week." Scott looked like he was about to have a stroke. "A week? You can't tear up my property for a week." "I'm not tearing up your property, Scott. I'm conducting legally mandated safety inspections on structures built on my land." I turned to Manny. "Better check the back patio, too. Those concrete pads look suspicious." As Manny moved his equipment to the backyard, I noticed we'd drawn an audience. Mrs. Larrabee was watching from her garden, and several other neighbors had found reasons to be outside. The sound of jackhammers tends to attract attention. "This is insane," Laura said. "Jason, you're destroying our home." "Your home, Laura. Remember? You made that very clear when you gave me 48 hours to get out." I made another note on my clipboard. "Although technically it's Scott's home. Built on my land, which he can't legally occupy without utilities. We'll get the utilities turned back on." "How?" "I'm the leaseholder. The utility companies won't provide service without my authorization." Scott was pacing back and forth like a caged animal. "There has to be something we can do. Some legal recourse." "Oh, there is," I said helpfully. "You could buy the land lease from me." Both of them turned to stare at me. "What?" Laura asked. "The land lease. I'd be willing to sell it. For fair market value, of course." "How much?" Scott asked through gritted teeth. I pretended to consider this. "Well, it's a prime lot in an established neighborhood. Good schools, low crime, excellent property values. I'd say 200,000. Scott's face went white. 200,000? For a land lease? That's actually quite reasonable. The house is worth 350, right? 200 for the land, 350 for the structure. Seems fair to me. I don't have $200,000. Then I guess you have a problem." I turned to Manny. "How's that foundation looking?" "Pretty shaky, boss. I think we're going to need to do some serious testing." The jackhammer roared back to life, drowning out Scott's protests. I watched him storm back into the house, probably to call his lawyer or his mortgage company or anyone who might be able to help him out of the hole he'd dug for himself. Laura lingered on the driveway, staring at the holes Manny was methodically drilling. "You're enjoying this?" she said. "I'm protecting my interests," I replied. "Just like you taught me." "This isn't like you, Jason." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in months. She was still beautiful, still poised, still the woman I'd fallen in love with 15 years ago. But there was something different now, something brittle and desperate in her eyes. "You're right," I said. "The old Jason would have just walked away, would have let you and Scott have your happy ending while I started over with nothing. But the old Jason was a fool. And what are you now? I'm a man who reads the fine print." That evening, as my crew packed up their equipment, Scott emerged from the house with a suitcase in each hand. Laura followed him, her own bag slung over her shoulder. "Going somewhere?" I asked. "Hotel," Scott said without looking at me, "until we can figure this out. Smart move. This place isn't really livable without utilities anyway." As they loaded their car, I noticed something interesting. They weren't talking to each other. Scott was moving with the angry efficiency of a man who'd been backed into a corner, while Laura looked like someone who was beginning to realize she'd made a terrible mistake. After they drove away, Mrs. Larrabee appeared at my elbow like a friendly ghost. "That was quite a show," she said. "Just getting started," I replied. "Good. That man has been nothing but trouble since he showed up. And as for Laura," she shook her head. "Some people don't appreciate what they have until it's gone. Some people never appreciate it at all." I packed up my tools and headed back to my workshop, but I didn't sleep well that night. Phase 1 of my plan was complete. Scott and Laura were out of the house, Scott's business was in trouble, and I had legal control of the property. But I wasn't satisfied. Not yet. Tomorrow, I was going to finish what they'd started. The foreclosure notice appeared on Scott's front door exactly 1 week after the block party. I wasn't surprised. I'd been monitoring the public records, and First National Bank had moved faster than I'd expected. What did surprise me was the phone call I received that same morning. "Jason, it's Laura. We need to talk." Her voice sounded different, smaller. The confidence and authority that had defined her for so long seemed to have evaporated. "Do we? I thought we'd said everything we needed to say. Please, just please. Can you meet me somewhere?" Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at Murphy's Tavern. She was already there when I arrived, sitting in a corner booth with her hands wrapped around a coffee cup, like it was the only thing keeping her warm. "You look tired," I said, sliding into the seat across from her. "I haven't been sleeping well." She looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in years: vulnerability. "Jason, I made a mistake." "Which mistake? Cheating on me, kicking me out of my house, or choosing Scott Williams as your exit strategy?" She flinched. All of it. Everything. I was angry and stupid, and I thought... She shook her head. "I thought Scott was different. Successful. Stable. And now? Now his business is bankrupt, the house is being foreclosed on, and he's talking about declaring personal bankruptcy too." She looked down at her hands. "He wants me to loan him money to save his company." "Are you going to? With what?" "I put my savings into that house as a down payment. If the bank forecloses, I lose everything too." I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown so tired of over the past year. But all I saw was a woman who'd gambled everything and lost. "What do you want from me, Laura?" "I want to come home." The words hung in the air between us like smoke. For just a moment, I felt something stir in my chest, an echo of the love I'd once felt for this woman, the life we'd built together, the family we'd created. Then I remembered the text message on her phone, the 48-hour ultimatum, the way she'd looked at me like I was something she needed to scrape off her shoe. "Home," I repeated. "You mean the house that Scott owns? The one that's being foreclosed on?" "I mean our home. our family. The girls miss you, Jason. They don't understand why Daddy doesn't live with us anymore. That hit harder than I'd expected. Beth and Janie had been staying with Laura's mother during this whole mess, shielded from the worst of their parents' war. But kids aren't stupid. They knew something was wrong. The girls, I said carefully, are the only reason I'm not enjoying this conversation more than I am. What do you mean? I leaned back in the booth and signaled the waitress for a beer. I mean, Laura, that you made your choice. You chose Scott Williams and his money and his fancy car and his promises. You chose to throw away 15 years of marriage for a man you barely knew. You chose to kick me out of my own house and try to take everything I'd worked for. I know, and I'm sorry. You're not sorry, Laura. You're scared. There's a difference. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into her coffee cup. When she looked up again, there were tears in her eyes. You're right, she said quietly. I'm terrified. He's not who I thought he was. When things started going wrong with the house, with his business, he changed. He became angry and controlling and... She touched her cheek, and I saw the faint shadow of a bruise under her makeup. That stopped me cold. Did he hit you? It was just once. He was stressed about the foreclosure, and I said something about maybe we should just walk away from the house, start over somewhere else, and he just snapped. The rage that filled me was immediate and overwhelming. Whatever Laura had done to me, whatever mistakes she'd made, no one had the right to put their hands on her. Where is he now? I don't know. He left this morning after the foreclosure notice was posted. Said he had some business to take care of. She looked at me with something like hope in her eyes. Jason, I know I don't deserve it, but I'm asking you to help me. Help us. The girls need their father. I finished my beer and stood up. The girls have their father. They always will, but you and Scott made this mess together. You can figure out how to get out of it together. Jason, please. No, Laura, I'm done. You want to know what I learned from all this? I learned that some foundations are too damaged to repair. Sometimes you have to tear everything down and start fresh. I left her sitting in that booth and drove straight to my lawyer's office. It was time to end this thing once and for all. Attorney Green was waiting for me with a stack of papers and a grin that could have lit up downtown Dallas. I have good news and better news, he said. Which do you want first? Start with the good news. The good news is that Scott Williams has officially filed for bankruptcy. His real estate company is finished, and he's personally liable for about $2 million in debt. And the better news? The better news is that the bank has agreed to sell you the house for the amount of the outstanding mortgage. $75,000. I stared at him. $75,000? The house is worth $350,000. Not anymore. Not without utilities, not with a damaged driveway and foundation issues, and not with the legal complications surrounding the land lease. Green leaned back in his chair. The bank just wants to get it off their books. They're willing to take a loss to avoid a protracted legal battle. So for $75,000, I can buy back my own house. Your house, your land, your life. Clean slate. I signed the papers that afternoon. That evening I drove to the house, my house now, and found Scott's Mercedes parked in the driveway one last time. I could see him through the front window, packing boxes and loading them into his car. I walked up to the front door and knocked. Scott opened it, and I barely recognized him. The polished, confident real estate mogul was gone. In his place was a man who looked like he'd aged 10 years in 2 weeks. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his hair was uncombed, and there was a desperate look in his eyes. Come to gloat, he asked. Actually, I came to give you this. I handed him an envelope. What is it? Eviction notice. You have 24 hours to remove yourself and your belongings from my property. Scott stared at the papers like he couldn't quite process what he was reading. Your property? I bought it from the bank this afternoon. $75,000. Cash. 75,000? Scott's voice cracked. I paid $350 for this place. You paid $350 for a house you couldn't legally occupy. I paid $75 for a house on land I already owned. Economics 101. Scott. Location, location, location. Scott crumpled the eviction notice in his fist. You son of a bitch. You planned this whole thing. I planned to protect my interests. You planned to steal my wife and my home. Guess we both got what we planned for. This isn't over, Fairburn. I looked at this broken man standing in the doorway of my house, surrounded by boxes containing the remnants of his failed dreams, and I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Yeah, Scott. It is. I turned and walked back to my truck, leaving him standing there with his crumpled eviction notice and his shattered life. As I drove away, I saw him in my rearview mirror, still standing in the doorway, still trying to figure out how everything had gone so wrong so fast. The next morning, I moved back into my house. Manny and the crew helped me repair the driveway and restore the utilities. Mrs. Larrabee brought me a casserole and a bottle of wine to celebrate your homecoming. Diana stopped by that evening with Chinese takeout and a smile that made me remember what happiness felt like. So, she said, settling onto the couch beside me, what's next for Jason Fairburn, master of revenge and destroyer of real estate dreams? I looked around the living room where I'd spent so many years with Laura and the girls. The furniture was the same, but everything felt different now, clean, new, like a house that had been stripped down to its foundation and rebuilt from scratch. What's next is I'm going to be the best father I can be to my daughters. I'm going to grow my business, and I'm going to spend time with a woman who appreciates what she has, instead of always looking for something better. Diana smiled and leaned against my shoulder. That sounds like a good plan. It's a solid plan, built on a solid foundation. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the neighborhood settling in for the night. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds, the sounds of a life rebuilt from the ground up. Laura called me once more, about a week later. She was staying with her mother, she said. Scott had disappeared, probably to avoid his creditors. She was thinking about moving to another city, starting over somewhere fresh. I hope you find what you're looking for, I told her. And I meant it. What about the girls? The girls will always have a home here. Always. And what about us, Jason? Is there any chance? I looked out the window at the house I'd fought to keep, the life I'd fought to rebuild. Some things can't be repaired, Laura. Some foundations are too damaged to build on. I understand. I hope you do. That was the last time we spoke. 6 months later, I married Diana in a small ceremony in our backyard. Mrs. Larrabee was our witness, and Beth and Janie were our flower girls. We honeymooned in Colorado, hiking in the mountains and talking about the future we were going to build together. When we got back, there was a letter waiting for me from Scott Williams. He was writing from somewhere in California, where he was working construction and trying to rebuild his life. The letter was short and bitter, full of threats and promises of revenge. I showed it to Diana, who read it and laughed. He still doesn't get it, does he? Get what? That you didn't destroy his life. He destroyed his own life. You just refused to let him destroy yours in the process. She was right, of course. I hadn't set out to ruin Scott Williams. I'd set out to protect what was mine, to fight for what I'd built, to refuse to be the victim in someone else's story. Sometimes the good guy wins not because he's perfect, but because he's willing to fight for what matters. Sometimes justice isn't about punishment, it's about restoration. Sometimes the best revenge isn't getting even, it's building something better than what you lost. I folded Scott's letter and threw it in the trash, where it belonged. Then I went outside to help Diana plant flowers in the garden we were building together, on the foundation that would last.